mediation.
Nikolai, how are you? Nice to see you.
Hello, Anthony. Nice to see you.
Yeah, here we are again. About 1 year ago.
Yes.
About 1 year
Oh,
ago, we
yeah.
started doing this. And
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
yeah, it's been
The
really,
life does not run. Life just flies, you know.
it's been
Okay.
really great for me to talk with you all these times. And about a year ago, I was interested in just learning some basics about Vygotsky and cultural historical theory, and really, I'm not the best reader in the world, so I could learn that way, but learning through conversation is something that takes it to a better level for me. And we started talking about even just the differences between like learning and development um, right from the start. And that was about a year ago. And almost all of our conversations have been focused on cultural historical theory. And
Yes.
but I have like a bit of a confession, I guess. Like the other
Hmm.
term you see all the time is CHT, cultural historical activity theory. And I feel like I'm
Yeah.
getting pretty well versed in cultural historical theory. But when the topic of chat comes up, I get like a little nervous, a little blank, and I'm not always sure what some of the distinctions are. Um, I know they're both very powerful and very interesting, and each is very
Hmm.
rich. But I was hoping maybe today you could
Hmm.
help me sort of by comparison to cultural historical theory. Maybe you could help me understand
Hmm.
chat a little better. That
Uh,
sound possible?
uh, I'm not okay. I'm not sure I can help you to understand chat because I'm not an expert in chat
Mm.
and I'm not doing chat. I'm not using chat as my theory, and I don't think it makes any sense to make a comparison of the theories because the problem of the relationship between the theories is much deeper, and using just a comparison might not be the best way to do. But what we can do is just to clarify some things which might mislead people, as you just very gently and very elegantly put it this way, and just to make some clarifications, and probably this is the most important. And then after these clarification things, people can start thinking about differences or similarities between chart and cultural historical theory. That's, I think, might be an interesting topic to discuss.
Okay,
So
yeah,
I will try to avoid any comparison, but I will try to clarify something, if you agree with this.
yeah, that sounds good. That sounds good. I want to show you something very, very, very briefly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And excuse me, just one sec. Okay.
Mm. Please, you are welcome.
So what I have on my screen here is this is I believe it's a chapter that you published this year. I don't know when you wrote it, but um, it kind of walks through the concept of identity, and it presents it.
Mm-hmm.
It sort of talks about what chat might offer in terms of studying identity, and what cultural historical theory might offer in terms of studying identity. And what I found was there was a great deal of overlap between the two, but also some differences, each with its own sort of strength. Um, and what you didn't do in this paper was try to raise one above the other. And I thought that was interesting. You really just kind of laid out what each theory can sort of do for us. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I was thinking, not necessarily to discuss this identity paper, but that's like my way in to the conversation. And
Mm-hmm.
some of sorry, some of the things you talked about
Yeah.
were that maybe they have different units of analysis, the
Yeah.
way they approach contradiction or transformation and reorganization, or even mediation, have some differences, each with their own sort of costs or affordances.
Yeah.
So is that possibly a way we can go into this?
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning this chapter. You just said you are not a good reader. You are a great reader. You know? you read, and your reading level of your readership, if I can use this word, is quite high. So please don't underestimate yourself as a reader.
Thanks. I'm very slow. I'm a slow reader.
And probably you as a reader is much better than me as a writer. That's sometimes I feel like that. Okay, yeah, you are right. That paper was about identity and how different theories might help us to study identity from different perspectives. And it was my intention, it was my aim not to compare the theories. And the reason is that I just wanted to destroy, to interrupt, to terminate one of illusions and one of stereotypes. Sorry, Anthony, stereotypes about myself, about Nikolai. There are two stereotypes about Nikolai. The first is that Nikolai doesn't like chat. Nikolai hates chat. Nikolai doesn't want to hear about chat. And this is absolutely stereotype. It has nothing to do with the reality. And the second stereotype is Nikolai hates triangle of activity. Activity triangle is Nikolai. If you say the word triangle, Nikolai gets crazy immediately. So no. Look, and that's why I just wanted to use the opportunity to show that I have all my respect to chat. And if you remember this chapter, there was not even one critical word about chat. It was you cannot find anything critical. Okay, so I respect chat, but, and this is not a stereotype, but I have some concerns about chat as a theoretical framework. And not only me. I know some researchers, and even famous researchers or just established academics, who started to work with chat, and they are moving gradually back to cultural historical theory. And again, this is a very interesting topic to discuss, but I don't want to discuss it now. What I want to discuss is just to answer your question about the similarities, differences, overlapping between the two theories without comparing them. And to begin with, I have to explain something related to the history. And telling the story about the history, I will just base on the historical facts. It's not my imagination, not my dreams, not my speculation. These are historical facts. And the historical facts are that what we have three theories. We have cultural historical theory associated with Vygotsky and his collaborators. We have an activity theory or theory of activity developed by Alexei Leontiev. He started to develop activity theory in the beginning of 1930s, and he continued to develop activity theory till the last day of his life. He died in 1979. Okay, if I'm not wrong, or something about it. So, and
that had a lot of overlap with cultural history.
Yes, yes. And this is a story about the relationship between cultural historical theory and activity theory. But even people who say that activity theory is related to cultural historical theory, even these people are saying that they are different theories. It is not like the same theory, but second generation. No, it was independent generation, the first generation of activity theory. Okay, cultural historical theory, activity theory, and in late 80s, beginning of 90s, CHT, cultural historical activity theory, appeared. Okay, so historical facts are: cultural historical theory appeared in mid-20s, activity theory in mid-30s till 70s, and late 80s, beginning 90s, CHT appeared as a theory. This is a historical fact. So, and on the other hand, three theories are somehow related. Okay? But what I'm, let's say, what is my concern about is that people who developed CHT and who follow CHT, I don't know why they call it CHT or activity theory, in brief. But this is a big mistake, because activity theory is the theory developed by Leontiev, and CHT cannot be named activity theory. This misleads the people. So my position is cultural historical activity theory and cultural historical activity theory. But what I don't like is that they call the third one an activity theory. And I was expecting the people just to explain to the community that, hey, people, please don't call us activity theory, because activity theory is Leontiev. But these people do not.
Are you saying this is kind of like three separate streams coming from the same body of water? Or is it two streams coming from the body of water that would be Vygotsky?
That's
not a good analogy.
So we have to understand the difference, similarities and difference between cultural historical and activity theory, and only after that we can then trace the difference between. What I'm saying is that the relationship between three theories, historically and theoretically, methodologically, are very complex. Okay. This is not like simple generations. So, and I don't like, and I totally disagree with the division of the CHT by generations, because when they say that Vygotsky was the first generation of CHT, it does not contradict, because Vygotsky did not develop CHT. CHT appeared almost 100 years after Vygotsky's death. Okay? Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
So,
yeah, I do.
Vygotsky was not the first generation of CHT, and Leontiev was not the first.
You're talking to a very naive student right now. So I'm sorry that if my questions are kind of dumb, or if I'm asking.
Yeah, no, it's okay. These are great questions, but I don't think the metaphor of generations is a good metaphor to explain the relationship between three theories. Because if we use generational approach, let's think about what generation is. Generation might be three generations of one family, like grandparents, parents, and children. They are three generations. But historically, grandparents die, do not exist anymore. Okay? So, and when I hear that there are three generations of CHT, my first question is, CHT, first generation of CHT? Vygotsky and chat. No, no, no. Vygotsky is not chat. Vygotsky is cultural historical theory. Second generation of chat. No, 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 no. So generations die. That's the reality, right? Yeah. Do you agree that in the family generations, all generations die or dying or has to die, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, and I think of some of my own, rest in peace. I think the only thing worse than dying would be living forever, probably. So yeah.
Yes.
But why is this? Why is this? Why would if somebody's like, okay, I understand what you're saying, but kind of like, who cares? Like, why should people care? I guess. I'm not saying that in a rude way, but why is this important?
Look, this is important because the idea of 3 generations of chart, the idea which is very popular, first generation of chart, second generation of chart, third generation of chart, and now generation number 4 is coming. It is not a best metaphor to explain the relationship because cultural historical theory still exists and is not going to die. No way. And activity theory still exists, not going to die. And chart as a theory exists, and God bless it. I would love to. So this is not generations which replace each other. They are 3 coexisting theories. Because when Vygotsky started cultural historical theory in 30s, when he died, some of his former students, colleagues, collaborators, they continued working in cultural historical tradition. They did not join Leontiev's activity theory. They continued to develop cultural historical theory in parallel with the group of Leontiev. So it was a kind of breakout rooms. Some Vygotsky's followers continued his line. Some of them would join Leontiev and started to develop activity theory. So, which means that there was a second generation of cultural historical theory. I can give you names: Lishina, Slavina, Bajovich, Morozova. Those names are not known in the West, but that people did really exist, and they were professors. They established their schools. They were not in Leontiev team. They were working, developing Vygotsky. And then there was a third generation of cultural historical theory. Vygotsky's granddaughter, which is actually physically the third generation. Vygotsky's granddaughter, Elena Kravtsova, all her life, she was working with cultural historical theory. She did not do anything with activity theory. She did not do anything with chart. She and her team for 40 years were working with cultural historical. So, in fact, there is first generation of cultural historical, second generation of cultural historical, third generation of cultural historical. In activity theory, it's the same. First generation of activity theory, second generation of activity theory, and the same with chart, but it's only because it's new theory, it's only first generation. So instead of one family, we have we have 3 families. Of course, they are relatives, but they are 3 families. Each of the family has its own generations. That's the complexity. That's the complexity. So, and I don't believe that there are just 3 generations of chat. No, no, no. It's not. It's not correct. So
very interesting.
That's a kind of that's. Huh?
I said that's very interesting, and I'm not very widely read, but I don't hear a lot of other people saying that, describing the same thing. This might not be a good question for now, but would you agree? Do you feel like you're one of the few people saying this, or is this kind of a widely known, and I'm just naive?
No, it's not widely known. It's this is what I'm trying to explain to people, that the reality is deeper. In some of my speeches, I try to explain this, but you know, the situation at the moment is there are some big names in chat, and these big names are great guys, but they take over, they keep a control over everything. You cannot publish in the journals if you are having a critical idea about chat. No way. So they protect their territory. That's why in my public speeches I explain, because what I said to you is just a historical facts, just a poor historical facts, which are ignored in the idea of just 3 generations of chat. So they took somebody as a second generation of chat, forgetting about many other people who physically and theoretically belong to generation. So it's not a good way. So that's why the metaphor of generations is not good. It doesn't explain. It explains, but it doesn't explain the complexity of the whole picture. Okay, it's again an example of simplification and fragmentation, as we discussed so many times with you, that the most difficult and the most dangerous situation is when the theory begins to be interpreted in very simplistic and very reductionist way, and this is actually what happens. So let's forget about the generations, because I have many things to say.
Yeah, good. Today we started off, Nikolai. You started off by saying perhaps you have a bit of a stereotypical reputation for speaking negatively about chat, when in fact that is not the case, as the paper that I referenced demonstrate. Like, that really wasn't the case. But I think the past couple of minutes, when you're trying to clarify some distinctions, I think that might be where where that reputation might come from. And having read the article and looking forward to the rest of today's conversation, I think I would agree with you that the reputation is not really deserved. So let's move our conversation in that direction. What are some things? Well, I don't. Is there a way to like summarize what you think chat is, very like basically, or would you like to take it in a narrow direction?
No problem. You said about reputation, you said about stereotypes. Look, in general, on the whole, believe me or not, but I don't care, because I know the reality, I know the facts, and it's enough for me. So if I cannot convince anyone, no problem. But reality is a reality, history is a history. You cannot exclude from history things you don't like. Or you cannot exclude from the history things which do not fit to your model. So that's not a good way to do things. Okay, so, and of course we can, and we need to discuss a lot of things in relation to all 3 theories. They all are 3 coexisting theories, because even now there are people, fantastic researchers, academics, who are not doing chat, who are not doing activity theory, but who are doing cultural historical. Okay, so we can find people who are not doing cultural historical and not doing chat, but they are following Leontiev's activity theory. And also you can find people who are not doing cultural historical, not doing activity theory, but using chat as their theoretical. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. But my main message is that instead of speaking about 3 generations, we have to speak about 3 coexisting theoretical approaches, 3 coexisting theoretical frameworks, 3 coexisting theories.
Maybe cousins?
Okay? Sorry?
Maybe cousins? Maybe nieces,
cousins,
nephews, relatives?
Cousins, so that's another story.
Okay,
Another story. Because generation model tells me that first generation died, second generation is still alive, but not. But the youngest generation is the most energetic. So that's not okay. So let's finish that.
So I wanted to just project this onto my screen very briefly.
Yes, yeah.
Just because one of the things in your paper that I thought was interesting was the concept of contradiction, and you and I have talked quite a bit about that. And in fact, contradiction is probably the central concept that allowed me to start to get a grasp of cultural historical theory. And in your
yes,
paper, let me just finish my question.
Yeah.
In this particular paper, we're saying the use of contradiction in a chat model is different than the way contradiction is thought of or used in a cultural historical theory model. Do you think that might be a place we could start? Like the way these two models deal with the concept of contradiction?
Yes, definitely. But let me say something before we come to the contradiction. Sure. Because the idea of contradiction requires changing of our direction, and we need to speak about dialectics.
Yep.
Because to speak about contradiction without dialectics is not the best way. So, but before coming to the dialectical layer, the dialectical, so to say, level of, I just want to say something about cultural historical theory and chart, not comparing them, but just presenting the specific features of each. So if you take cultural historical theory, I mean cultural historical theory of Vygotsky, and which is not dead, which is still alive. This is a very clear theory. I mean, it's a sort of classical type of theory. It has very clear subject matter, and the subject matter is the process of development of human consciousness, which is the system of higher psychological functions. Okay, so it has several laws, several objective and universal laws of development of higher psychological functions, which are important, which is important part of the theory. It has its system of concepts, which are related to the subject matter and which are related to the laws of development. And finally, it has its own research method, which is related to concepts and laws. See, this is a kind of clear theory with all these aspects. It looks like a classical theory, like a classical traditional theory. So what kind of theory chart is? Chart is a different type of theory. It's a type of postmodernist theory which has no clear subject matter. What is the subject matter of chart? I don't know. Activity, interactions, mediation, well, work design, system of activity, I don't know. So, are there any laws represented in chart? No. What is the system of the concepts of chart? Yeah, maybe subject, object, mediated artifact, all these things. Yeah, that's more or less okay. But you see, these concepts are different from Vygotsky. Vygotsky didn't have a concept of subject or object or division of labor. Okay? So, and finally, what is the main research method of chart? I don't know. Maybe there is some, but it definitely is different from that of Vygotsky. You see, Vygotsky wanted to create a fundamental classical theory based on the classical principles with very clear components. Chart is a different type of theory. It's a theory but theory created and the structure of the theory is very different. So, but probably this is not the most important point. The most important point is cultural historical theory was a psychological theory, and it was a theory of developmental psychology. Okay, because the idea of cultural historical was to understand the process of psychological development. Activity theory, Leontiev, was also psychological theory, and the idea of the theory was to understand the process of development of consciousness, but consciousness from human activity, consciousness activity principle. So they were different theories, but they were both psychological theories, theories of psychological development of human beings. CHT is not a psychological theory. It is not a theory of psychological development. It is not a theory of development of high psychological functions or consciousness. This is a theory about activity systems. Very interesting matrix to analyze any kind of activity systems. It might be school, it might be a restaurant, it might be, well, the research community, it might be university, it might be every activity, every system of activities of human beings. That's okay, but this is not a theory of psychological development. And this is the most, from my point of view, from my humble opinion, is the most important difference between Leontiev and Vygotsky, cultural, historical, and activities, and CHT.
That's very helpful. Very helpful.
Yeah, and I even think that CHT is not the theory in a classical sense of this word. It's something theoretical framework or something.
Which probably has its advantages and maybe disadvantages.
Yes, of course.
Would you say this is a very basic framing? But would you agree that cultural historical theory is a little bit more focused on maybe an individual, whereas CHT is a little bit more focused on group or system?
No, because if you look at CHT, in CHT there is no more focus on individual or more focus on social, because they take a system. If you look at Vygotsky, there is also no priority given to individual or social. It also takes social individual as dialectical unity. And as you know, in dialectical unity, there is nothing which is the first and then the second. So dialectical unity is the unity, two parts are equally important. We cannot say that this is more important, this is late. We can focus on that, focus on that. So this is a dialectical thinking. Yeah, so I don't think it's a big difference, but for me, the biggest difference is that Vygotsky theory was about the development, how the social becomes the individual, how higher psychological functions appear, how they become individual functions, how they then the individual is using these functions to regulate his activity, which is social. So okay, so how social is becoming individual and how individual is becoming social. So, but this is focused on the development. But CHT is more focused on transformation of the components of activity systems, like changing of the activity systems, reshaping, reframing, or transforming of existing activity systems to make them more efficient. So, and we are coming to the idea of transformation, and we are coming to the idea of development. So that's what I wanted to discuss before we come to contradiction. I still remember your question.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
So, and
So would
one
you,
of the
very briefly, would you say perhaps different personality types might be drawn more towards cultural historical theory or more towards chat? Do you think, or not necessarily, or do you think it's maybe it's there might be a preference for another reason, or perhaps it's just simply what you learned about first, or maybe none of the above?
I have to think a little bit to formulate.
Sure.
So, as I said, and I just want to repeat that chat, from my point of view, is not a psychological theory at all. Okay? It's about humans, it's about human activities, it's about systems of activities. Of course, it does not include human beings, but the process of their development is not in the focus. The focus is on the transformation of activity systems, bringing changes or mediations between subjects, objects, divisions of labor, tools, and so on, so on. So this is important because one of the concepts of chat is the idea of transformation. They even call it the principle of development, which is a transformation. But as we already discussed, and I'm sure you remember that not every transformation is a dialectical process. Not every transformation is developmental transformation. And do you remember my example with the movie Transformers?
Yeah, the transformer might be able to change shapes, but it can also change back.
Yes.
And if something
something
can transform back, then it would be dialectical.
Because yes and no, because that transformers, they are mechanical systems. They have mechanical components, so they don't grow. They do not develop as organic systems develop, because robots are mechanic systems. So, and they can only transform themselves. But living systems, organic systems, they are not only transforming themselves, they can create new organs. Like a tree, which when it grows creates new waves. And when the system is able just to create from itself new organs, new waves, this process is called metamorphosis in Hegel. This process is called reorganization, qualitative reorganization. Yeah, you are right. It cannot come back, but transformers can. But the main point is that transformers do not build from themselves something else. So they are still the same. There are no more components. So, and it might look like a transformation, but sometimes not every transformation is a dialectical reorganization. Okay? So we have to be very careful. And that's why I think that Vygotsky theory is mostly focused on reorganization of the system and how new high psychological functions appear in chat, right?
Is there a metamorphosis dynamic in chat, or is it more, or do you think it's more of a sort of a mechanical transformation of a system? Is there an organical element?
I don't think they consciously think about the mechanical, but from what I have read, maybe I was wrong. So they are using term transformation all the time. I didn't find any paper about chat which speaks about reorganization. Okay, they speak only about transformation, and this is enough from their point of view. When the system is transformed, it's okay. But for me, it's not enough. But as I said, they probably do not need the idea of reorganization, because this is not a theory of development. They are not taking activity systems as self developing systems. It's not their focus. Their focus is that how the system is in the process of transformation. And this is my question, and this is my concern, and this is my understanding. For me, cultural historical theory is much better to study the process of development because it relates to the process of reorganization. But reorganization doesn't happen without any reasons. The reorganization is always a result of a contradiction. If there is no contradiction, there is no development. If there is no qualitative change, there is no development. Development is not only quantitative change, it's a qualitative change, revolutionary, as Vygotsky said. So, and now we are coming to your question. I'm still keeping your question in mind. So, what do you think is the idea of contradiction in chart? And what is the idea of the contradiction in cultural historical theory? What do you think, Anthony? Are they similar or there is a difference?
From what I understand, I see a fair amount of similarities, but I'm not sure how explicit they are. That might be an interesting point right there. It seems to be, and I don't know this model very well, but it seems to be that contradiction in chat deals with contradictions between different points on the triangle.
Yes.
And contradiction in cultural historical theory deals with, to some extent, capacities and demands. Like there are certain demands, but you don't have the capacity yet, and the demands sort of fuel the meeting. You either meet it or maybe you don't. But that's where the tension or the drama. So, but I don't know. I don't know if like at a system or activity level. I don't know if that's a mechanical thing or an organical thing, and is there talk of systems developing, or is there more talk about just systemic change, things like that?
You see, this is not an easy question, and
I feel better now.
And it needs a special conversation. We can spend hours discussing that. But let's forget for a while about the contradictions in chart when the different components of the triangle are contradicting. Let's come back to the dialectical understanding of the contradiction, because there are contradictions and there are dialectical contradictions. And not every contradiction is a dialectical contradiction, as you know, okay? For example, we can be in a contradiction with you, we can be in a total disagreement, you disagree with me, I disagree with you, but it has nothing to do with a dialectical contradiction. So a dialectical contradiction is the contradiction between two coexisting tendencies, processes, which together define the certain thing. Do you remember my example about life as a contradiction of death and birth? Do you remember that conversation?
I don't think so. I think it makes sense.
Okay. Then I can give you an example of the dialectical contradiction about two processes, coexisting processes, which logically should not exist at the same time, but they do exist at the same time, and only together they defined some process which cannot exist without them. And my favorite example is life, biological life. Let's look at what life is from biological point of view. What is life? We can say life is the process which begins from the birth and ends with the death. When there is death, there is no life. When Before birth, there is no life. I mean, if we forget for prenatal, of course. So, and there are three things: birth, life, death. Okay? Can then birth and death coexist in life at the same time? No. When there is birth, there is no death. When there is death, there is no birth. So, right? This is an example of formal logic. Formally, the birth and the death are mutually exclusive. They cannot coexist, right? But dialectically, they do coexist, and they define life. If we look at birth and death as not as oppositions, but as dialectical opposites, it gives us a very interesting way of thinking. Yes, death is not the opposition of life. Death is the opposition of birth, right? Yes? Yes, okay. That's important because people always think traditionally life and death as two opposites. No, birth and death are two opposites. Right? Okay. And they both together, they create life. When the human body, the organism, first moment from the birth, we might say, okay, the act of birth is finished, now life begins. But that's not correct. Biologically, the process of birth remains because every moment, every single moment, the organism creates new living cells. And some cells are appearing in the process of birth. At the same time, some old cells are dying. They are in a permanent process of death. And as you know, every 3 or 4 years, there is no one single living cell in your organism which you had 4 years ago. They all are new. So the process, the birth is not the act, it's a process which goes across all life. And death is a process of permanent dying of your body in the process of life. So death and birth are the processes, not the acts. And they coexist during life. Your organism is in the process of birth and in the process of death at the same time. This is an example of...
I find that very comforting.
Huh?
I find that very comforting. It's very comforting.
Comfort?
It's comforting. I like that thought. It's a good feeling.
Ah, okay. So you agree, huh? So
yeah, and I like thinking about death in those terms.
Yes.
Okay. Rather soothing.
Perfect. So, and then when we die,
and here we are 45 minutes closer to death.
Right? Yeah. But look, when we physically die, our children, they are continuing the process of birth and the process of death. So, and life as life exists. So this is the example of how we can use dialectics to analyze the process. And you see that death and birth are processes. So they are contradictory processes. And they are, of course, contradictory because they are opposites. So the same logic Vygotsky tried to apply to psychological development, because he said that development of higher psychological functions follow and they obey the same laws and Vygotsky said that we have to find the basic contradiction, and for him, in relation to subject and object, why Vygotsky did not use subject-object was that for him, he said that no, from psychological point of view, subject is nothing more than the individual, not just subject, abstract subject, but very concrete individual. You and me and somebody. And what is object? What is object? What is external? What is what say that outside, inside? So the word outside and word inside. Say that external. Sorry, this is the word external. Okay, external for Vygotsky is not just external object; it's a social. So, not object and subject, but the dialectics of the individual and the social. So, and where is the dialectics here? And where is the contradiction? The contradiction is that individual is not the social, and social is not the individual. But dialectically, what is social? Social is not just social surrounding. Social is a social environment. But what is social environment? Social environment is the system of interactions, communications, relations I am involved in. So I'm the participant of my social environment, active participant. In some sense, I'm creator of my social environment. And this is what makes social surrounding, what makes a social environment. So social does not exist without individual, because if myself as an individual do not participate, there is no social environment. So,
can you say a few more words about the individual being the creator of the social environment?
Okay, so
I find that very interesting, and I know that there's a lot of people who.
So okay,
quite the opposite.
let's make a distinction. What is social around us? We can call it social surroundings. So some social things which happen. So, and is this the social environment? No. Social environment is only when me as an individual, I participate in my social surroundings. I interact with other people. I have relations with other people. I can do something together. I can debate. I can communicate. I can cooperate. I can contradict. So my participation in my social surroundings makes it social environment. Without me as active participant, the social environment does not exist. It just becomes, again, social surroundings, which is not related to me directly. Okay.
It would be a social environment for others, but simply a social surrounding.
Yeah. Okay. So, and now you see that social does not exist without individual. Social environment doesn't exist without the individual being a part of this social environment, active part. And sometimes we even create our social environments, right? Sometimes we go and ask for the help. So what we are doing is that we are creating our social environment, making the social environment, building the social environment, or shaping, reorganizing our social environment, depending on our needs and our ideas. So, okay, but this is about social. But then, what then about individual? Of course, formally, from formal logic, individual is not a social, of course, because there is a social and individual. But dialectically, what is individual, as Vygotsky says? Let's take an example, again, development of higher psychological function or cultural forms of behavior. First, we participate in the cultural forms of behavior, and then through internalization, these cultural forms of behavior and higher psychological functions, they are becoming our own, they are becoming our internal, individual higher psychological functions. For example, you can think for yourself. you can say, Nikolai, when I think, it's absolutely individual, because it's my thinking. It's internal, it's my thinking. But of course, I know you are now looking at me smiling. Of course, if we go deeper, we can say, okay, and what is the nature of your thinking? What is the origin of your thinking? He said, well, origin is social. Why? Because in thinking, I'm using language, right? Or logical structures. And how did I learn these logical structures? From social interactions, right? So, and as Vygotsky says, high psychological functions, even being totally, completely internalized, they still remain social by their origin, by their nature, and by their structure. So, when we think for ourselves, or when we speak to ourselves, we communicate with ourselves, right? But why we're able to communicate with ourselves? Only because when we were young, we communicated with others. And through this, we have learned this internal ability. So this is individual, absolutely individual. But historically, it is not completely individual. And Vygotsky says every higher psychological function was external because it was social. I'm quoting Vygotsky. This is quotation from volume 4, page 106. Vygotsky says every higher psychological function, every individual higher psychological functions was external because it was social. It was a real social relation between two people. And being internalized, it remains quasi-social. It still remains the social because we are still able to, socialize with ourselves or communicate with ourselves or thinking. So you see, the individual is at the same time social. Now, summarizing, social is at the same time individual. Individual is at the same time social. So they are social and individual are two dialectical oppositions. Subject and object. No, we cannot say subject is at the same time an object. An object is at the same time a subject. No, impossible. But social and individual. So this is a difference between triangle of activity and Vygotsky's approach. Then mediation, for example, mediation. As we already discussed with you, I told you several times that
you hold on, please, just 1 second. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. So then summarizing.
Mediation.
So, summarizing the previous point. So instead of object and subject and object, which is very abstract and very formal contradiction and formal distinction, Vygotsky suggests the dialectics of the social and the individual. So for him, internal is individual, external is social. So, and from this dialectical unity, he was able to explain the cultural development and development of higher psychological functions. Then the next point is, and you see there is a contradiction. So the process of development goes through the contradiction between individual and social. And one of the forms of this contradiction is a contradiction, a clash, a collision between real forms, present forms and ideal forms. We have discussed that because ideal forms are more social. Present forms are more individual. So, and they are in contradiction. And then the child has to overcome this contradiction through mastering cultural forms of behavior, through coming and being able to master the ideal forms. So this is a kind of concrete manifestation of this basic fundamental contradiction of social and individual, which is not an opposition, but it's a dialectical opposites. Okay. Now, mediation. If you look at the triangle of activity, you see that everything mediates everything there, right? And many people believe that everything mediates everything. But as Vygotsky said, if you want to explain everything, in fact, you are explaining nothing. So, and on the top of the triangle of activity, there is a component called mediating artifact or mediating tool sign, right? If you can show the triangle again,
Sure.
You will see. You see on the top, yep, mediating artifacts, okay? So, I don't want to explain that where is the problem here, but I want to tell that Vygotsky was not against the very concept of artifact. He said that there are two things which people use to mediate their activity. Tools, for example, tools of labor, or some other tools, like, for example, very practical tools like spoons, forks, knives, and so on, and signs. And he said that psychologically they are different. I don't want to discuss this, but Vygotsky wrote, it was written in Vygotsky's text that one of the mistakes people do is that they are unifying these two different tools into one concept of artifact, which makes the picture very vague and which eliminates the principal important difference between the two. Okay, that's it. But what is here is mediating artifact. What it mediates? It mediates the relationship between subject and object, right? Yeah? You see on the top? Mediating artifacts are between subject and object, okay? But for Vygotsky, the point is not what mediates, and the point is who mediates. We cannot ascribe to artifacts, to tools, the specific features of magically being able to mediate something. It's a kind of, I know, animation of we are prescribing to these artifacts the ability to mediate, as if they do mediate something. Vygotsky was categorically against that. He said that the problem is not what mediates, the problem is who mediates. And the answer is that human beings are using different signs and tools to mediate their activity. If people do not consciously use tools to mediate their activities, these tools mediate nothing. They begin to mediate, they begin to work as a tool, as a mediator only when somebody is using them as a tool. So tools do not mediate. We are using tools for our activity, and therefore they are taking they are beginning to complete, they are beginning to work as mediators. So they obtain the function of mediator only when human beings are using them. Themselves, they mediate nothing. They have no power. They have no power to mediate. We cannot mystify them.
Are there any circumstances where the tool or the sign, which would be a psychological tool, are there any circumstances?
Yes.
Are there circumstances
Yes.
when the tool has more agency than the individual?
No, I don't believe in this. We can speculate on that, but your question was to compare cultural historical theory of Vygotsky. So, and Vygotsky said, so we can debate with Vygotsky, but before debating with Vygotsky, we have to understand his position. And his position was clear, was explained very clearly that, and he even said that to say that sign or tool is able to do something, it's the same than to say that the stick is taking banana to chimpanzee. But in fact, chimpanzee is using the stick to take the banana. Stick itself has no power to bring banana to chimpanzee. That's what Vygotsky said. And he said that speaking about this, you are forgetting the human being. And he makes a reference to Chekhov, the cherry orchard, or cherry, what is the Chekhov's, what is in English Chekhov's piece? Cherry orchard, something like that. So you should not forget the human beings who mediates. But your question is, okay, first of all, Vygotsky says that first we are using signs to mediate our relations with other people. But then through the process of internalization, vыращивание, the sign becomes the individual. It becomes the individual tool of mind. But becoming individual tool of mind, it is not equal to the tool of labor, like a spoon or the knife. So the word is the same, tool, but the meaning is different. So you see, this is the process of mediation, is about who mediates and who remediates. And in Vygotsky's experiment, what he did, the task was given to the child, for example, to remember something or to keep the attention to something, and the child could not. It was a collision, contradiction specially created, and the child was not able to complete the task. And then there were some neutral objects around this, like small pieces of paper, some pieces of wood, or just small wooden cubes. And child was given a kind of way of how to use these objects as tools which might help him to, or as a science, which might help him to remember something. And the child is begin to actively use these neutral, absolutely neutral objects like paper, pieces of wood, but the child begins to use them as a reminders which might help them to forget something. So you see, paper, piece of wood, cubes and others, these are just objects. They are not mediators. They mediate nothing. They are just objects. But only when the child begins to use them as a sign for themselves, they begin to mediate. So then, what mediates? Not a problem. Who mediates is a problem. And we are coming again to the role of the human being. And that's what Vygotsky says. The human beings are actively reshaping, rearranging their social situations using external tools, external signs, and then external signs are becoming their psychological tools. That's the idea of mediation. So, and in triangular activity, we can see on the top mediating artifact. So there is no mediating human there, unfortunately. So this is again a difference between chat and cultural historical. In cultural historical, there is a human being who mediates. In chat, there is an artifact which mediates. Boom. And it's okay, because chat is not about psychology. It's okay, absolutely okay. I don't mind. It's a great idea, But I'm a psychologist. I'm interested in development. That's why, for me, chat is great theory, but it's not about what I'm doing as a researcher.
One other thing that you discussed in your paper was that perigevania is a concept that, as far as you know, exists in cultural historical theory, but doesn't make
Yeah,
much of an
yeah,
appearance in chat.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Do you think, could it or should it make an appearance in chat?
Oh, yeah, that's interesting, interesting question, because what I know from the literature, there is a kind of number of several attempts to incorporate переживание into the chat model. People are trying to put переживание there, but there is no place. There is no place for переживание in chat model. They don't need, because переживание is about development, but chat is not about psychological development. Переживание is the concept which helps us to understand the role of environment on development, but chat is not about the role of environment to individual development. There is no individual, no social there. And therefore, there is no place for переживание there. Of course, mechanically, you can incorporate. You can take your robot, you can take your transformer and put something physically, make it looking better. But in fact, because your transformer do not need anymore, it's okay in itself. But I can tell you even more. Переживание was, and you know, it is one of the most important concepts in cultural historical theory. But переживание totally, completely, absolutely disappeared in activity theory. Even in activity theory developed by Leontiev, переживание was excluded from the system of concepts. You cannot find anything about переживание in Leontiev's work, because Leontiev had developed a theory which was different from Vygotsky, and he did not need the concept of переживание at all. And even more, he was very critical to переживание. He criticized Vygotsky for using переживание as a unit of analysis. Leontiev was completely against using переживание as a unit of analysis.
You know why?
Yes, because Leontiev developed very interesting way of theorizing consciousness. He has developed the principle of the unity of consciousness and activity. Consciousness and activity. So that was a unity, the principle of the unity of consciousness and activity. What is consciousness? Consciousness is internalized activity. That's it. But for Vygotsky, the logic of Vygotsky was not the logic of the unity. There was a logic of units of analysis, not the unity of two things, but the unit of analysis. So there were two different logics of analysis, two different fundamental logical constructions. That's why переживание was so important for Vygotsky. That's why переживание was absolutely nothing for Leontiev. And as chat is based on Leontiev mostly about activity, so there is no place for переживание in chat. But of course, as I said, chat is a kind of theory which is postmodernist theory, which can incorporate everything easily. It's like one more block to your Lego to your Lego construction. So
I think a common and very interesting story that is told, or that is paired with to introduce perigevania, is the alcoholic or the psychotic mother and the three children, each who are affected by their environment clearly. So the outside is influencing them, bearing down on them, but they each they have their own individual experience that is like fracted in different ways, and different outcomes.
Yeah, yeah.
So
That's
whereas both cultural historical theory and chat do discuss the relationship between like the outside and the inside, or the social and the individual.
yeah, it's a very interesting
What am I trying to
example.
say? Here's what I would ask. If you were to try to suggest or persuade a young academic or a young researcher who's using a chat model, if you were to offer them this additional tool of Parvijavani, how would you do that, or what would you say to them?
Well, first of all, with all my respect to chat, if somebody is using chat for their research, I say, okay, perfect, do it. No problem, because chat is a very strong theory, but this is not a psychological theory. This is not a theory of psychological development. Therefore, this theory does not need the concept of переживание, because concept of переживание is absolutely psychological concept. It relates to the influence of social environment on the course of development of the child. The development of the child, psychological development of the child, is not what chat is interested in. Okay? Why should we use one concept from psychological theory as an addition to the concept, to the theory, which is not a theory of psychological development? Only because переживание is now becoming so popular. That's not a good reason. Okay, you have to be you have to be theoretically coherent. But I'm saying, if you use chat, please use chat. Okay, be coherent, be logical.
Is chat and forgive me for I'm pretty naive here, and I might be bringing my own priors into this question. Is chat concerned with cultural or social development, or cultural or social change?
It's about cultural, it's about social change and change of activity and transformation of activity systems. That's it. It's very interesting. It's a very interesting, because activity systems are transforming all the time. That's fantastic.
Is there a big distinction between social change and social development?
Yeah, of course. Not every change is development. You know about that. We had a discussion about that. Sometimes we don't go deep. Sometimes when we see the change, we immediately make a conclusion that this is a development. But not every change is a development. It's like not every change you get when you pay in the shop, they give you a change. Just you pay $1, they give you 5 cents back. It's a change, but it's not a development. I'm joking, of course. So I'm joking, of course. Development has a very important characteristics. Sure, yeah. Development should be the process, and it should be reorganization and qualitative reorganization, metamorphosis. No metamorphosis, no development. And change might be just change. I can come to my car, I can make changes in my car, I can tune my car, I can change windows on my car. And this will be a change, but this will be not the development, because my car is mechanical system. So, but in organical systems, developmental changes are the results of the resolution of the contradictions. So I can bring change to my car, but my car will never create a contradiction and will change itself. Okay, so that's again a very simplified, simplistic, superficial understanding of development as equation of development with change, or change with development. Yeah. And so you see, the principle of development is different in Vygotsky and in chat. The idea of contradiction is different in Vygotsky and Chat. The idea of subject and object is different in Chat and Vygotsky because there is individual and social. The idea of mediation is different in Vygotsky and Chat. Okay, so, and now my question is, what from Vygotsky remains in Chat? If all these aspects are different, on what degree then Chat really has a connection with Vygotsky? I cannot find anything from Vygotsky in Chat. Only saying that we are developing Vygotsky, we are third generation of Vygotsky. That's it. That's the only argument. Because if you look deeply, as we try to do it now, we took most important characteristics and we see that they are different. But I'm not saying that Vygotsky is better than Chat or worse. No. These different theories are different theories of different things. Vygotsky theory is theory about development, psychological development. Chat is a theory about how activity systems can be transformed for better production. So they are different. And this theory Vygotsky works very well in this field, and Chat works very well in its field, but the fields are different. The areas of applications are different.
To what degree or to what extent would it be a mistake to take historical concepts of development of a human individual's developmental functions and map that on top of a bigger entity like a classroom or even a culture or some sort of system? Are there similar processes at play in terms of how things grow or change or develop? So can some things from Chat be sort of brought into a bigger picture domain? Are there developmental principles that would be consistent?
No, I don't believe any combination of two different theories. It might look quite good for the paper, it might look good for the chapter, but we are speaking about deep and serious science. We are speaking about being theoretically coherent. And if you making combination of two, it looks very good, it looks very nice. I don't mind, but it's like, okay, you want to build a machine, you take a part from helicopter, another part from the submarine, the third part from the train, and you clip all this together and it looks very good, but this machine will never work. I don't like this. So if I want to fly, I prefer to take the flight. If I want to go somewhere, I take a car, but I don't like the machines built from parts of different machines. So Vygotsky theory was designed for making a research on psychological development. Chat was specially designed for studying the transformations and improving of activity systems. So if, as a researcher in a classroom, my task is to focus on the process of child development in the classroom or in play or in learning, if my task is this, it's better for me to take cultural historical theory with the instruments. If my task is to think about how can I optimize or how can I improve my pedagogy, my pedagogy or the whole school for better support the children's well-being. So I'd rather take Chat because Chat gives me the basic model, like subject, object, division of labor, and rules, and so on. And I can just, as a matrix, I can just put the matrix to the reality, and I can understand the components of my activity system, which components contradicts to which, and which components mediates, and then I can make changes. So that's why they call it developmental work research, right? They are trying to reorganize or transform the system. This is a different task. There are different tasks. It depends on our research question. But what I'm against is that the difference between these two theories is not clearly explained. I don't know why chat people still keep on this idea of generations. And one of the recent publications of Uri Engström was on video. He tried to explain why generation model, but I expected from him something like, dear people, sorry, we misled you. The generation model is not good. Now we know that it was just a metaphoric, but unfortunately he didn't tell this. So he insists that generation model explains the relationship with three theories correctly. But as I said at the beginning of our conversation, it does not explain the relation between the theories correctly, because it excludes many researchers and generations of researchers who were involved in the process of developing cultural, historical, and activity theory. Well, and that's my question. And I'm asking this question all the time, but there is no answer. But it's okay. I don't mind. Chat is great.
So
I agree.
so I wasn't crazy to propose this conversation today, and I wasn't completely nuts to be a little bit confused and to be seeking some distinctions between the two. But I think certainly when I watch this a second time, that's usually when I could be present in a different way. I could pull things apart in a way that's very
okay.
I'm pretty sure we covered the main subject of today's conversation. It's very interesting.
And we spent again 2 hours. Oh, Anthony.
We're 2 hours closer to death, but I feel more alive.
Yeah, and I love to talk to you, Anthony, because your questions are so interesting. And what I like most of all is that you are from practice. You are a practical teacher, not a high degree academic or doctoral. So, but you are interested in such a deep and high matters and items which not every teacher is interested in nowadays. And that's, for me, it's important. And this is one of the reasons I love to talk to you, because academics, they are very tunneled people. They know what they know and they go. But people like you, they are open-minded and they are ready to think. They're ready to make steps forward, and that's the reason I'm talking to you.
Well, thank you. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah.
And I always learn. I always feel like I'm learning a lot on the spot. And when I process it a second and a third time, that's when I really learn it. And
Yeah.
I appreciate it so much.
Oh no, we all learn from our teacher. We all learn from Vygotsky. So we are students. Look, if comparing to Vygotsky, there is no difference between us, Anthony, because Vygotsky is a mountain, is a Mont Blanc or Everest. Comparing to Everest, the difference between who is higher, you or me, is nothing.
How does that happen? How does one individual in 3 decades, 3.5 decades, become an Everest.
Oh,
Idea? I mean, obviously,
oh,
this was one of the hardest working people
yeah,
around.
and I don't think I can reach the level as Vygotsky had, but at least we have a good example. We have a good role model, and we can learn a lot of lessons from him.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating topic. I know it's not for everybody, but somehow the fact that the more I learn, the less I understand, and it keeps me moving.
Oh yes, yeah. Okay, so great
to see you. Yeah, and thank you very much.
Yes, and thank you very much for your time, for your energy, for your interest, for you encouraging me to discuss these things. Because without you, I could probably will be not able to do this.
Well, so, maybe we'll do it again then. I don't know what the topic will be, but let's keep an eye out for that.
Okay, absolutely, always. It's my pleasure. Why should I say no to you? Why should I yes to my pleasure? Why should I no to my pleasure? I don't know. So just contact me and we continue. Okay.
Sounds good. Okay.
Okay. Ciao. Thank you very much. And you give me the permission when you have a video to put the video to my YouTube channel?
Sure, absolutely.
Awesome. Absolutely. Okay. No copyright problem between us.
Always, yes, this work is open for you always.
Okay. Thank you very much, and have a great day. And I go to bed.
Yeah, and now I'm going to go to work, so I have to go.
Yeah. Okay. You will become social, and I will come to my bedroom to be absolutely individual.
Yeah, unless I'm in a dream right now, I'm not sure. I always feel that way. Okay, I'll talk to you.
Okay.
All right, ciao.